Hello, everybody. It is me, Game Penguin 21, and today, well, it's the end of the month, which means that it's time for your weekly news roundup. Now, there's not going to be as much salt in this one as there's more just going to be regular old news stories that I think didn't deserve their own videos and went by a little bit too quickly, but all of this inevitably does happen to have a place here and there in terms of the news outlet. Most of this is, again, going to be gaming related, and it's going to be related to smaller news stories that most people might have missed. But we're going to start off with a pretty big story, but get smaller as we go on. As for the trailer for what we have going on today, we have some interesting Switch 2 news having to go on with the hack from the end of last month into the beginning of this month. We have a Randy Pitchford update, a very strange one, but one that I guess is the happy ending, but not really. At the same time, we then also have news on Splitgate 2 and how its developers are apparently psychopaths for wearing a hat and trying to market their game. We have the Russian government with some interesting choices being made in the gaming space. Yes, I did not stutter. We also have a very interesting amounts of bans and walking away, as well as some interesting positive news to kind of end this off, as well as a little bit of salt to really, really get behind what we have going on here. With all that being said, let's get started. Of course, starting off with the big old Switch 2 news, which is probably the biggest thing that you'll hear throughout this whole video. This actually spans throughout the entire month, as recently the update for this has come out. Now, at the end of last month, around May 31st, there was the interesting update on the Switch 2 being unhackable debate. Now, this does come at a time when people had very little information on this and said that, before, right now, the actual way that this worked was the post itself did a little bit of a weird update of how scanning a chip with some sort of weird voltage detection, which seems to, at least with the update, be verifiable, but we'll get into that. The initial thoughts on this was that this was actually wrong, and at least according to the added context here, which were actually true at the time and with the information that we had, saying that this post features unsubstantiated, unsourced claim, and had very much in ridicule of the original thread. Additionally, even if this was done for testers who received their console early, it doesn't mean it would see the same for regular consumers, with the original thread being documented as well here. This original post, as far as I can tell, has probably since been deleted, so it might have been a rage bait at the time, but as of right now, with the updated information, this seems to be somewhat validated, though as of right now, we are unsure. But moving on to the actual thing, people were talking about how the actual hack was improtectable and basically was making serious Switch 2 stuff, and this is how this shit works, and was literally hacked within 1 day, according to at least Switch 2 Tools here, who was probably one of the aforementioned leading people on this whole hacking the Switch thing, where this might not look impressive to most people, but basically this was using external software or software not made to be run on this hardware to actually run on this hardware and be actually read by it. It's very complicated and very strange, but this post quickly got the attention of not only other people, such as Dumpster Fire saying the Switch 2 has already been hacked here, and also Ghost Boy saying to everyone who said it was wrong about the Switch 2 being hacked in 2 months, with more screenshots, not necessarily the ones there. This was also reported on a lot by a lot of people, and in turn, a lot of Nintendo fanboys basically just pulled the one weird kid from Recess who basically told on fucking everyone, or that one kid who always told on you for doing even the minorest of minor infractions wrong, and we're basically trying to be that good old teacher's pet, suckling on the teat of Nintendo Switch 2 and the developers of Nintendo. So it might have been a process in that, but unsure as of now. But with Kazuma X here, yes, this is unfortunately in Japanese, so the translation might not be as good. Just bear with me here. Saying that I knew the outcome. Switch 2, the Japanese version, tried to make Switch. As a result, make Switch cannot be used. X emoji, where it basically shows that he is apparently banned for something, or the actual Switch itself was unable to be used. Somehow, it seems that this is detecting some sort of something having to do with the actual thing itself, it's very strange, very weird, makes no sense, at least to me, but at the same time makes all the sense if you really think about it. The actual Switch tools here coming back with how it has been banned and the test was all done, and just the perfectly legal dumps of the game, which is him basically using the old stuff on the new hardware, trying to get, I guess, the new hardware stuff out of it, seems to have failed. Now, the thing is that I'm not sure if this works with just the Switch games or if this can work with other things. Overall, this is very vague and very little information seems to be released about it as of right now. But Madi Fitcaster here with after all, it was obvious that Nintendo was ready for the Make Switch and Unlock Switch. It's a wonder why bans didn't fall right away. Players just buy games to support the developers because there will be no games, hashtag gamers, hashtag pirate. Now, of course, in a more interesting thing here, and to just kind of, I guess, answer this very salty man-child's question, why did bans not fall right away? Well, it does take a while for people to detect these sorts of bans, and there is such a thing as ban waves. Now, to make it more clear on, say, for a multiplayer side of things, the anti-cheat is really just the first smaller line of defense, as in it's the lock that kind of people can pick through, but that lock does actually filter out a lot more people than you might expect it to be. But there is still things such as manual reviews, and things will eventually, inevitably, slip through the cracks when it comes with cheaters. Now, with cheaters in, say, multiplayer games, there are things such as ban waves, and these things do tend to happen, so that way it's harder to detect those types of bans from happening. But for something like this, it might just be that they were monitoring software, or they somehow were monitoring this thing, or they pushed out some sort of weird update because they knew the issue or something. Unsure, and the actual notion of which we will probably never know as to why this initially worked and then didn't work for something. So at this point, it just seems to be that, unfortunately, the Switch, while it did have a pretty bad opening day, is a little bit more locked up tighter than people might initially think. So we move on. This is not a setback per se, but it's more of just a mere bump in the road that kind of derailed the project just enough. Overall, that's all I have to say on that, and we're moving on to Randy Pitchford. Randy Pitchford with some big news with his actual thing here. If you remember the last time we talked about good old Randy, he was basically telling people that you would make it work with whatever price that we fucking pay, because that's what real fans would do. With the actual updates here, where he did a half-hearted apology later, and with this one saying, no price increase for Borderlands 4. Standard Edition launches not at $80, but at $69.99. They're showing you, so please show them. You can find links to the pre-order of Borderlands 4 on PC and the console version at the store pages. Now, this is, I guess, the better of the two endings here, where it was, inevitably $80 and Randy Pitchford had to fucking eat his words here, but it is still $70, which is still, in my opinion, overpriced for any fucking digital video game, at least for me personally. I don't have $70 kicking around in my pocket, do you? I mean, some of you might, because you actually have, other things that are going on in your life, but so do I, just, not as much. Overall, here and now, the inevitable problem with this is that it is still $70. So, yeah, while not the greatest ending to that, it is at least good to know that Randy Pitchford, in his only Randy Pitchford way, somehow turned some good news into news that basically kind of makes it look worse somehow. Very surprising, but not at all. Next up here, we have Dexterto with a very interesting small smackdown here with Valve's newest game, Deadlock, lost over 90% of its player base since it was revealed, with 3 major updates have come out in 2025, but none of them resulted in a massive player count increase. With people adding context saying Deadlock is not officially released and it's not in a finished state, and the game is invite only and has received no major marketing yet, and really has not really done much in terms of trying to grow in terms of that, because again, it is still in its early player base. I found this funny because not only the readers adding context thing, but if you look at the actual Deadlock logo, right underneath it, it says early development build, meaning that it is not a game that is officially released by Valve. It's also, again, invite only, and yes, I do have an invite code myself, or have been invited to it, but quite honestly, it doesn't seem like my personal type of game. Nice hero shooter overall, but again, eh. In other kind of sad video game news going around here, we have XDefiant being no more with the servers officially shutting down. RIP the best FPS game of all time. And no, I would say that at best, XDefiant cracks the top 30 FPS games of all time. It wasn't fantastic, but at the same time, it was Call of Duty, just not Call of Duty, which is, again, still pretty solid, but at the same time, there are other FPS games. A lot more of them are single-player FPS games, so in terms of multiplayer FPS games, I would say this cracks into the top 15 for me, but that's going up against very stiff competition, including Call of Duty itself, which still has its place, definitely didn't crack the top 10, and has since been probably demoted down to just above XDefiant, but that does not mean that XDefiant is bad by any stretch of the imagination, at least as far as I could tell here. I think that this was overall officially killed by Ubisoft, not because it wasn't good, but also because it just didn't perform well. It's the same thing with Hyperscape, where Hyperscape initially had a pretty decent launch or a very interesting idea for a battle royale, but came out at a time where, well, it was going up against even stiffer competition and lasted, well, not as long. So a lot of the Ubisoft games that have been shut down for that, which is a little bit upsetting. In another interesting amount of news here, we have Splitgate 2. Now, Splitgate 2, what has actually happened here? Well, Splitgate 2 was announced and talked about at, I believe, the Summer's Games Fest or something, and on this actual stage, the person here, Ian, who I believe is either the CEO or a head developer, someone up at the top of the actual development ladder, came out with this specific Make FPS Great Again hat. Now, of course, if you know anything about politics, you might know that there is a specific and actual reason as to why this whole thing is a little bit of a quote-unquote problem for people, even though this is more specifically a nothing burger. So, yeah, he came out inevitably with some sort of, not really apology, but more of just a statement saying, quote, "I'm not here to apologize, but I am here to clarify. This is not a political statement. It is quite literally what it says. Yes, take it at face value. The state of multiplayer FPS gaming is in a tragic state. We hope to fix that wherever the arena, battle royale, onslaught, or map creator, Ian." Now, what is my take on this? Well, to be quite honest, the actual presentation that was involved with this hat was kind of understandable, but also a little bit We'll get into that in the next tweet, because this seems to be sort of a running theme or pattern. But the Make FPS Great Again hat is distinctly different in many ways from the other hat in question, and was meant to be more of a meme hat and a meme sort of thing. And if I'm being honest, I guess I could see it, and I personally don't think this is a huge issue. In fact, this is more or less a nothing burger of anything. Had you just say, take that hat out of the question, and just even had it with just the speech, it might have come off as even worse. But at the same time, this is still the place where people just completely and utterly just can't go 30 minutes without talking about this stuff. This is why I stick to video games more or less. But this, again, sort of insulting to this, seems to be a sort of running pattern where on the same official Splitgate 2 account here, basically retweeting a person who is working for the Splitgate thing with the Make FPS Great Again thing, and it's Splitgate with Splitgate 2 saying, which Call of Duty does your team make again? I can't tell them apart. A kind of low jab, but one that actually is pretty above board here. I mean, again, it is just more or less some banter back and forth, but someone decides to say, coming in here and saying, this is so embarrassing. If you have to put down others to hype up your own product, you inherently look weak. Our creators, as the case in point, hasn't said a peep of criticism against other games in its niche. Let game speak for itself. Absolutely blows up, which in some cases works, in other cases doesn't. There are times when those specific marketing tactics have worked in the past. For a very interesting and strange example, we actually have a Sega with Sega does what Nintendo don't, or the Nintendo whatever. And overall, that marketing campaign was fairly successful, at least initially, for the Genesis, and then it just kind of tapered off, and Sega eventually died. So maybe not the greatest of tactics, but it's more of just a very edgy and with it and hip, hello fellow kids kind of way. But overall, I mean, I guess that makes him look bad, and it does. In some cases it does, in other cases it doesn't. But speaking as a marketing guy, this really isn't, again, much of anything in this context. I do think that it was a little bit ill-advised to be making these kinds of tweets at the same time while still insulting your other game developers in the industry on the show floor of your thing, which, again, might have been another little bit of a misstep. But again, at the same time, not the worst. So there have been a lot far worse marketing campaigns. If you want some more of interesting marketing campaigns and probably even some dumber CEO stuff, I have an entire top 10 video loaded down on that. Go and watch that top 10 dumbest CEOs thing. Really funny watch in my own personal opinion. Next up here, we have Squad 22 Zov. Now, Squad 22 Zov actually came under fire, and a little bit rightfully so, because this is a Russian-made game endorsed, or at least supposedly endorsed, allegedly, by the Russian government, as far as we can tell. It seems to be a free-to-play RTS-styled FPS, well, not really, RTS-styled game where you take on kind of small-ish battles and things from across the actual battles here. But what really gets my interesting goat here is actually the blurb on the side, where we will read it out thusly. It is a single-player, tactical, action, real-time game with active pause to plan orders carefully. Okay. Based on real wartime experience of living Russian veterans of war in Ukraine. It's all about modern conflict, small infantry groups with some armed vehicles and drone support, as well as real events story. Now, as far as people can tell here, this whole thing seems to be some sort of a propaganda, at least in case here, with the actual reviews of the game being mixed, which is interesting here. If this was just overwhelmingly negative, people would just write it off and just go on their merry way. But the sheer fact that, at least at the time of this here, being mixed is quite interesting. This is also released at the very end of last month after I released my end of month recap here, so there is that. But overall, this is quite the weird situation here, because on the one hand, yes, being endorsed by the Russian government doesn't exactly make your game look fantastical, especially considering that you are using things such as the war in Ukraine, as well as support for, quote, real events story. But at the other hand here, there was also America's Army's Proving Grounds, which was another free-to-play tactical FPS that was used as sort of training for the American armed forces. So that also propaganda? As far as I could tell with the American armed forces, or the America's Proving Grounds, or whatever, didn't seem to have any sorts of, actual propaganda in it, as far as people can tell here. The only real propaganda might have been some of the America's Army branding and maybe some of the extra stuff that would be there, but as far as I could tell, that was really the only propaganda, which was getting people to try to enlist into America's Army. So interesting, I guess, but the sheer fact that this is actually pertinent itself as being a official with working with the actual veterans of the war in the Ukrainian area, as well as having actual real events story, that kind of rings true of maybe this is not true. But again, I will never play this game because I do not like RTSs, so there's that. But moving on from some very gray and kind of depressing news, we then have some more positive news of the world actually healing here, with Icon Era's account officially being suspended by X, or Twitter. And holy shit, this is quite the story. I myself needed to make sure that I actually found out about this, but I found out about this through, of course, Josh the Editor, who I personally like to follow with his no. And overall, it is correct, at least as far as I can tell here, where I personally looked up Icon Era's post, and here's the official account suspended screenshot. Unsure if this will actually try to get back with, say, an Icon Era 2 or a new Icon Era Twitter account. Maybe it was just a bot, maybe it was just some sort of thing that happened here, but it is cool and good to see that the world is healing. More on the world is healing fact here. We then have Japan hates Xbox saying the following. It is with a heavy heart that I announce that I will be going on an indefinite hiatus from X moving forward due to the insane comments from the deranged man baby, Elon Musk. I am a hardcore supporter and will be, and I do not support this platform, X-Clodded. Now, what are my thoughts on this? Well, if you don't know who Japan Hates Xbox, I'm wondering where kind of rock that you have crawled out from under to kind of find this channel. But Japan Hates Xbox has always been a very PlayStation-esque kind of fanboy, where he has always decided to, basically big up anything on Twitter, and the sheer fact that he's decided to leave Twitter because of, well, the fallout that was Elon getting, I guess, fired from the administration itself. No politics talks here. I don't really care for the specific story. It's just really funny to me how he's like, I'm going to leave Twitter and go probably somewhere else to bitch and complain about the Xbox that I completely and utterly don't find as a good product, but will still bitch and complain because, well, that's my whole branding here. I give it a week before he comes back crawling onto Twitter trying to get the quote-unquote numbers and engagement back. But good to see that he decided to, again, leave. And if he's actually decided to stick to his word, I actually have a little bit of respect for him. With, again, Josh the editor coming back with probably the best comeback I've seen in a while with, I'm sure this has nothing to do with Final Fantasy coming to Xbox, eyes emoji, blank face emoji. So, just thought I'd throw that out there. Next up, on a more positive hype train here, we then have Stellar Blade, where they have now sold 1 million in 2 months, with the whole exclusives are dead thing here, with them giving the official 137,000 thing. Now, this is interesting because there is also enough evidence to support that 1 million copies have sold since the launch of Stellar Blade in the first 3 days of the actual engagement there. And, PlayStation only to sell 1 million of these in 2 months when PC could have carried it and had a far more amount because they literally made up a third or even a third of those things, a third of the total sales in half or even 19 times the size. If you want more information on that specifically, go and check out Joe from Seattle's video on this because quite honestly, this is big news, and congratulations and big ups to Stellar Blade. Congratulations on a successful PC launch. I hope you have a lot more success, and I hope that 3 million comes along quicker than you might expect. In more positive gaming news here as well, we then have the finals being into the top 10 best-selling game on all of Steam and the third best-selling free-to-play game behind things such as Counter-Strike and Marvel Rivals. I myself was ecstatic to hear this because, again, as some of you may or may not know, I am a huge fan of the finals. And yeah, I haven't talked much about the actual game itself, but this game, in my personal opinion, is fairly good. But we're talking about it being in this, and of course I had to go out and check on this, and of course, in the top 100 sellers, there it is, good old the finals, actually going up about like 73 in terms of changes here, and has been at least on the bestsellers top list for like 12 weeks, according to this, with it, again, being a free-to-play game, and overall, the only things that on this list that are also free to play are huge, massive titles like Marvel Rivals and Counter-Strike 2, being that those are huge titles that have been strongly hit and smacked and basically been as popular as they've been out for the entire time that they've launched. It's quite interesting to see the finals kind of back up there, doing the good old climbing there. And again, it is hanging out with games such as Dune Awakening, the Altars, which I'm not sure about that, Helldivers 2, and Elden Ring Night Rain, with, again, Dune Awakening, the original version being really the only top seller, because, quite honestly, when I took the screenshot, that's what happened. But just to go down the list here of some of the other stuff that it actually ended up beating out, things such as the Steam Deck, the Doom Awakening Deluxe Edition, Deltarune, by the by, as well as MapleStory and Expedition 33, Gears of War Reloaded, and again, I guess the deluxe edition of the Altars, but at the same time, it's beating out things such as huge, massive titles and titles that have been waiting around for a while, including MapleStory. What the fuck, MapleStory? What are you doing? Step your game up, but that's more of just a thing. But interesting. Good for the finals. Thank you for that whole thing, and that was some good news to end off this. But back down to the old salt mines, we then have Nib complaining about the Final Fantasy being 443, very specifically decided to scroll down to that, and with Astro Cyborg kind of just adding the only commentary that is needed here, saying, celebrating a game not doing well, definitely not a fanboy. Correct. Nib, along with a couple other people, are definitely not fanboys for celebrating the failure of games only on specific platforms. Speaking of people who are totally not fanboys, we then have Dom the Bomb here with nothing will beat the PS4 generation, in my opinion. We were truly blessed with the actual PlayStation 6 now being the top of the mind, at least in terms of dexterto for the new Sony CEO. Where I wanted to point this out because what's really funny is that practically all of these games, or more or less all of these games, are now on PC. So, you know, if all these games were like the best PS4 generation, yeah, it was the best because we got all these exclusives, despite the fact that the PS2 exists and has become like the best selling console. I mean, brother, please. So moving into the only real political thing that I will say probably ever on this channel, because, well, this person decided to just spam good old men's mental health does not matter, where Duck here kind of does this whole statistic with, I'm not too certain as to what this statistic is, and I don't want to get into it, anything else, but readers added context specifically to the whole men's mental health doesn't matter, saying men's mental health does matter, in fact, matter for every human being. I just want to say that's the case, as last month was also, alongside the good old Rainbow Month, was also Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, which a lot of people have some mixed opinions on, and quite frankly, I don't really have anything else to say or do on that whole thing. Just be good people to each other, and I hope that people get over this sort of fantasy of I win or something. But finally, and probably the strangest news, we have Matthew Patrick, aka Mr. Game Theory himself, going into politics. Now, what exactly did Matthew Patrick do? Well, according to at least Matt Pat on GT here, where he actually has the official notion here, he basically decided to make a caucus in the House of Representatives, a bipartisan, that's how you pronounce that, group where creators can work alongside lawmakers to ensue legislation in a timely, relevant manner for the internet age, where he has already 10 representatives, at least at the time of this being screenshot being taken, and they will eventually assemble creator advocates from around the country. So if they're interested, sign up with Matt Pat. And I just have to say, big ups to Matt Pat. You're doing some pretty decent work here, where this seems to be, as far as I can tell, a sort of caucus or a sort of the bipartisan group, which is a group of representatives meant to come together to induce legislation into at least the American side of the laws to try to get people up to snuff with the internet age, which I think is actually a fairly good and decent thing to go forward here. And of all the people that I would think would be the people kind of spearheading this operation, I'm very glad that it is Mr. Good Old Matthew Patrick himself. I do hope that this eventually does come to some sort of fruition, and it does end up bearing fruit. There are times when caucuses, sorry, I hit the microphone. There are times when these sorts of things are usually ignored in some cases, but I think that since he's saying things for like the internet age, he's not just talking about just content creators, but he is talking about actual legislation for other things that are outside of just the standard regular content creators and stuff, mainly just probably creators and internet personalities across the board. Again, this is something to definitely keep an eye on if you care at all about anything having to do with your rights as citizens and things like that. And I know that this is kind of, again, me getting into that political territory again. Just note that this is good, and this, again, has to do very little with gaming, but I wanted to give big ups to Matt Pat because he kind of wrote out a lot of the childhood stuff. Anyway, with all that being said, I think that'll about do it for this month's News Roundup. Quite the interesting array of stories to go back through them. We had Stellar Blade hitting new numbers, Matthew Patrick going into some sort of Mr. Game Theory, I'm going to start doing the rights of things, and essentially just all of everything in between of just very weird and interesting stories. But with all that being said, my name is GamePenguin21. If you like what it is that I do, want to support in any other way, shape, or form other than like and subscribe, which is always enough. Links down to everything in the description below. I'm looking to hit 1.5k by the end of this year, and of course, always come out to Sunday's streams to see me play some video games and stuff. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and a peace off.
Hey man, can I get a favor? Yeah, sure, I know